France entered May 1940 with more than 5 million people mobilized, many capable tanks, powerful allies, and months to prepare. 6 weeks later, nearly 60,000 French soldiers were dead, 1.8 million were prisoners, and France had signed an armistice. France was not weaker everywhere. So why did so much military and economic strength become useless so quickly? To understand that, we need to begin with the problem France thought it was solving. The First World War had left northern France devastated, and a generation of French families scarred by mass death. France entered the next crisis with fewer young men than Germany, and no desire to repeat the same slaughter. Its answer was not simply to hide behind concrete. The Maginot Line protected the eastern frontier, covered important industrial regions, and reduced the number of soldiers needed to hold every kilometer equally. It was meant to channel a German attack north through Belgium, where French and British armies could meet it on prepared ground. This was a manpower strategy and an economic strategy. Concrete and artillery would save lives, buy time, and allow France and the British Empire to mobilize their larger long-term resources. The plan assumed that time belonged to the Allies. French doctrine was built around what officers called the methodical battle. Information would travel up the chain of command. Staffs would study the situation, coordinate artillery, infantry, armor, and aircraft, then send detailed orders back down. Against a deliberate enemy and a stable front, this could concentrate enormous firepower, but the system treated speed as a danger to be controlled rather than a weapon to be used. During the quiet months after September 1939, France mobilized, dug positions, manufactured weapons, and waited. The waiting created a strange economy of war without a major battle. Millions of workers were taken from farms and factories, yet the army had little immediate work for many of them. Training was uneven, supply arrangements remained cumbersome, and urgently needed equipment could move through the system with extraordinary slowness. France was spending resources, but it was not converting all of them into readiness at the same speed. This mattered most with armored warfare. The popular image says German tanks overwhelmed France because they were more numerous and universally better. That is wrong. France and its allies possessed many tanks, and several French designs had thicker armor and heavier weapons than the German vehicles they faced. At Sedan, individual French tanks absorbed repeated hits and demonstrated how dangerous they could be. But a tank is not only armor and a gun. It is also a radio, a crew organization, a fuel truck, a repair shop, a bridge, a map, and a commander able to change direction. Much of the French tank force was distributed in small groups to support infantry. That made sense inside the methodical battle, where tanks helped a planned attack move one stage at a time. It made less sense when several armored divisions had to appear unexpectedly, move rapidly, and exploit a gap before the enemy could react. Many French tanks also had limited radio equipment. Orders could depend on flags, messengers, or vehicles stopping to communicate. In several important French designs, the commander had to observe the battlefield, direct the driver, load the gun, aim, and fight from a cramped turret. Even an excellent machine became part of a slower information system. German armor was not uniformly superior, and most of the German army still moved on foot or behind horses. The difference was concentration. Germany grouped its armored divisions into operational formations with radios, motorized support, engineers, reconnaissance, and close air cooperation. The point was not to make every unit fast. It was to make the decisive part of the front move faster than the enemy's decisions. On the 10th of May 1940, German forces attacked the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. The northern attack looked like the move the Allies had expected. French and British armies advanced into Belgium under the Dial-Breda Plan. These included many of the best equipped and most mobile Allied formations. Their supply columns, headquarters, aircraft, and reserves followed them north. But the northern attack was also a lure. The main German armored effort entered the Ardennes, farther south. The terrain was difficult, the roads were narrow, and the German columns created enormous traffic jams. If the Allies had identified the concentration early and struck it effectively, the plan could have failed before the tanks reached the Meuse. Instead, the sector was defended by weaker formations, while French attention and mobile strength were moving toward Belgium. The German gamble converted Allied planning into empty space. At Sedan, German engineers and infantry crossed the Meuse under concentrated air attack. The Luftwaffe did not destroy every French position. It suppressed communications, disrupted artillery, frightened defenders, and created the impression of an attack larger than the forces already across the river. German aircraft were being used like mobile artillery at the exact point where the crossing had to succeed. Allied bombers then attacked the bridgehead and bridges. In one major effort, 44 of 72 bombers were lost. The problem was not that the Allies possessed no aircraft. It was that German fighters, anti-aircraft guns, and air support had been concentrated around the decisive operation, while Allied air power was divided among competing missions and commands. The same contrast appeared on the ground. German armored units used radios to report openings and mission-type orders that gave local commanders room to exploit them. French decisions often had to climb toward a distant headquarters and return as a new plan. The French command system could produce detailed orders. It struggled to produce a new understanding of the battle before the battle moved again. Once the Sedan bridgehead expanded, German commanders pushed west rather than pausing for the slower infantry armies behind them. That decision was risky. The armored corridor was narrow, its flanks were exposed, and its supply line ran back through the Ardennes traffic jam. French counterattacks at Stone and Montcornet showed that German spearheads could be hurt. But the attacks arrived separately, with limited air support, incomplete units, or too little time to coordinate. France still had weapons. It could not assemble them into one decisive response quickly enough. On the 20th of May, German armored columns reached the English Channel. The map had changed faster than the Allied command network. The strongest Allied armies were now trapped to the north, cut away from the main French forces to the south. This was not merely an encirclement of soldiers. It was the severing of an economic system. Fuel depots, ammunition stocks, repair facilities, railheads, headquarters, and replacement units were suddenly on the wrong side of the German corridor. A tank without fuel was not combat power. A division without orders, transport, or an open supply road was not the number printed in a mobilization ledger. The evacuation at Dunkirk saved hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers from capture. But most heavy weapons, trucks, fuel, and equipment had to be abandoned. Britain recovered much of its trained manpower. France lost both the Northern Army Group and the strategic position on which its campaign plan depended. The second German offensive in June faced a French army that had already lost many of its best formations and much of its mobile equipment. The government moved south as refugees crowded the roads. Paris was declared an open city. Organized resistance continued in many places, but the national command and supply system was disintegrating. France signed the armistice on the 22nd of June. The campaign had lasted roughly 6 weeks. Nearly 60,000 French soldiers had been killed. About 1.8 million became prisoners of war. Those numbers make one myth impossible to sustain. France did not fall because French soldiers simply refused to fight, nor did one concrete wall cause the defeat. The main German breakthrough did not smash directly through the strongest part of the Maginot Line, and France did not lose because every German weapon was better. It lost the decisive operational contest over where resources appeared, how quickly information moved, and who could turn a local opening into a national crisis. The German system was not frictionless or fully motorized. It was simply much faster at concentrating a selected part of its strength. France possessed national resources. Germany created a temporary monopoly of force at the point that mattered. The armistice did not end the economic story. It reversed its direction. Military defeat turned France from an allied industrial power into an occupied resource base. Metropolitan France was divided by a line of demarcation. The occupied zone covered roughly 55% of the territory and included Paris, the Atlantic coast, major ports, and much of the country's most valuable industrial network. Movement of food, people, raw materials, and finished goods across the line required German permission. The economy was fragmented, but German access was not. Under the armistice, France was required to pay the cost of the German occupation forces. The money did far more than pay for barracks, food, and salaries. French taxes and borrowing supplied francs to the occupation authorities. German purchasing offices could then use those francs to buy French machinery, food, textiles, vehicles, and industrial goods. France was being made to finance the purchase of its own output by its occupier. Over 4 years, occupation payments reached roughly 700 billion francs. By 1943, at least 55% of French government revenue was being used to meet occupation costs. German authorities requisitioned or redirected more than 40% of French production. Coal, iron ore, bauxite, machinery, food, trucks, and manufactured goods flowed toward the German war economy. Shortages and rationing deepened inside France. Money existed, but shelves emptied and the black market expanded because prices could not create goods that had already been removed. Labor moved as well. French prisoners of war worked in Germany, and hundreds of thousands of other French workers were recruited, pressured, or compelled to serve German industry. The occupation economy also operated through collaboration, coercion, and persecution. Anti-Jewish laws excluded people from professions and businesses. Aryanization transferred Jewish property under state power. Deportation and forced labor turned human beings into targets of both racial policy and economic exploitation. This was not a clean transfer of resources from one national ledger to another. It was a system of military domination that destroyed rights, lives, trust, and productive capacity while redirecting what remained. That is why the economics of France's defeat cannot be measured only by tank totals or factory output. Before the armistice, the critical issue was conversion. Could national resources become a coordinated force at the decisive time and place? After the armistice, the critical issue was control. Who decided where French taxes, factories, food, labor, and machines would go? In May 1940, France had millions of soldiers and many powerful weapons, but inventories do not issue orders, repair vehicles, move fuel, or recognize a breakthrough. Germany won a risky operational gamble by concentrating communication, mobility, engineering, and air power faster than France could reorganize its strength. Then Nazi occupation converted that military victory into years of economic extraction. France's resources had not disappeared in 6 weeks. Control over how they were used had.